Welcome to the Choral Connection, a series of interviews with musicians with whom Maestro Harold Rosenbaum has collaborated over his 47-year international conducting career. We hope you are inspired by their artistry and the stories they have to tell. For more about the series, please visit www.haroldrosenbaum.com.
Good evening. Hi,
Hey,
Thea.
Harold. Great to see you.
Thank you too. Thea, you make me laugh because you're so funny all the time. Okay, here we go. Today, I am very happy to have my dear friend Thea Musgrave with us. Anyone can Google your name and read your illustrious biography, parts of which I will mention in a moment. We have known each other ever since we became colleagues at Queen's College in 1987, where you were a distinguished professor. You were a distinguished professor, and I had a decidedly lower rank at that time.
You were a lot younger, that's the thing.
Not younger. I think I was an adjunct lecturer or adjunct professor at that time. And I have conducted virtually all of your chamber choral music, about 14 works, because I love every minute of all of them, and have had the distinct pleasure of becoming a good friend of yours over the decades. Now, I know you've been interviewed countless times where people can learn much about you, but I have learned a thing or two about you myself that are not in your biography. For example, let me start by asking about Benjamin Britten, whom you told me you met a few times. What were the circumstances where you met him, and what was your impression of him as a person as well as a composer?
Well, as a person, I didn't know him that well, but I certainly met him a few times. We were in first name basis with each other. And my opera, the Voice of Ariadne, was done at Aldborough. So that's usually where I met him. But once or twice we were on a panel together judging I forget what, and so we would see each other there. But usually it was in Aldborough, where I also met Holt's daughter, Imogen. Yeah. We all called Imo, and Colin Graham also lived there, so I saw him as well. But I've been lucky. I've met a lot of different composers, other composers beginning with B, Boulez. I remember once Peter and I were crossing Lincoln Center, and we ran into Boulez, and we started talking, and we all went to have a wonderful Chinese dinner. You know, that's wonderful. Berio, I once met at a party, and I admired him greatly as a composer. But I also met, of course, in this country, I knew Copeland very well because I studied with him all of one summer. I knew Elliot Carter. Elliot Carter was more of a friend, he and his wife Helen, and came to dinner in each other's houses. So that was great. Wojciechowski from Poland, I knew. He came to dinner once or twice. And Stravinsky, I once met. Wow. Because Boulanger knew him really well. My teacher in Paris, Nadia Boulanger, of course, knew him very, very well. And for some reason, she invited some of her students to a reception where he was going to be. Well, I met him, but I remember at one point standing directly behind him and counting the few hairs across his balding pate. So that's not really me. Oh, and I met Dalla Piccola. That was great. A very, very important person in Britain, when I just came back from Paris, was William Glock. He went into the BBC and really looked after the proms and Radio 3, which is the music program for the BBC. And he knew everybody. And I remember it was at a party at his house that I met Dalla Piccola. And I seem to remember talking about il gatto, the cat that they had. So that's the one Italian word that I always remember. So anyway, and then of course the British composers I knew was a great friend with Richard Rodney Bennett. Right. And everybody's heard his music because not only did he write wonderful, what can you call it, classical music, but also film music. So everybody will have heard his music. I knew Max very well. And Maxwell Davis.
Oh, Peter Maxwell Davies. Yeah.
Peter Maxwell Davies. We called him Max.
Okay.
And he lived up in the Orkneys. And I remember once telling my students at Queen's, where we met and where I taught for many years, and I said, you want to know how you get to visit Max? And so I said, well, you get on a plane in New York and you go to London. So that was easy. And then you could take a plane maybe up to Edinburgh, also easy. Then you take a plane from Edinburgh to the capital of Orkney. I can't think of its name right now. Is it Kirkwall? No, I can't remember. Anyway, then you take a bus. That's on the east coast of the island. You take a bus across the island, past a fabulous Stonehenge remains called Skara Brae. And then from there you come to the coast. You then get in a boat and you cross to the island of Hoy. And then you walk up a steep mountainside. And then if you're lucky, there is Max.
Oh.
So,
do you think he was trying to hide from anybody?
I don't know, but that's where he was. He had a place in London, of course, as well. And I never met him in Hoy. I always met him in London, or sometimes even here on the West Coast, because he came on tour with his group. So yeah, so that's about, I met all sorts of people, all sorts of composers, which has been wonderful.
Now, when you say here on the West Coast, tell people what you mean.
We're in Los Angeles right now because we're sequestered here with this pandemic. We're here by chance, actually. We usually come here to escape. The things I don't like about New York are the cold, but worse is the heat in the summer. So we escape for a couple of months in the winter and a couple of months in the summer. So we have a little tiny place here with a great view. And that's where we are. And then we got trapped here with the pandemic. So we've been here very nearly a year without being in New York.
And you can still write where you are. You're as inspired. It doesn't matter where you are. So you can.
Well, luckily, yeah, composing, you don't have to have a lot of things. You just need a desk and your ears and I have a small synthesizer and a lot of patience, which we have. So
I remember seeing Igor Stravinsky creating staff paper with a little invention where he would draw 5 lines across a blank piece of paper and then use that as staff paper.
Yeah, that's right. But actually, fortunately, there's a Xerox place, so that's quicker.
Yeah, right.
So I Xerox my manuscript. I have sort of master copies of the sizes that I like and the rulings that I like. Right. And I go to the FedEx and get them Xeroxed.
Well, that's one of the things I was going to ask you and tell you is about your handwriting. A lot of the pieces I've done by you are from your handwriting. So you handwrite still everything and then send it off to the publisher to be.
Yes, of course, because the time Sibelius came in, I was 70 or something. I wasn't going to start to learn that, and I said to my students, you guys have to learn. I'm too old and I'm not going to, but you guys have to learn. But you see, I have an incredible, wonderful inputter, if that's what you call them, who lives in Edinburgh, my hometown. And he works through my publishers. And so he does all my scores and he knows all my, quirks and things that I do. And, he says certain things are I'll tell you one thing that's very interesting. If you have grace notes, some chakaturas or something like that, you usually write them after the bar line. So there's a sort of slight gap when you go before you land on the bar line. Now, I like sometimes to write a whole bunch of grace notes going up to the bar line. So they can't come after the bar line. They have to come before, which is, of course, where they actually happen. Right. Do you think Sibelius makes that easy? No. Not at all. So John, my wonderful person at Edinburgh, had to find a special way to deal with me. And he charges my publishers a little extra because I do that.
And I'm sure they accept that red handle.
I think so.
Speaking of notation, I remember, you probably don't remember, I don't know if you remember, but I encountered you on the second floor of the music building at Queen's College back 30 years ago or more. And I asked you something, and you gave me a very funny answer. If you look at the complete works of many of the Renaissance composers on the shelves of the library, for example, you see in 4/4 time, you see a whole note tied over to an eighth note.
Right.
There's no agreement, I find, among singers and even a lot of composers I've spoken to about what that really means. So it seems to me that means it's a whole note. It's not a whole note tied to an eighth, an extra half beat. And do you remember what you said? You said to me, you send a whole note into your engraver or the publisher, and it comes back as a whole note tied to an eighth. And you leaned into my face and said, it's a stupid British tradition.
Well, actually, I like it because there's a difference between if you tie that whole note into the next bar, and does that whole note match the harmonies, in which case you just join them up. If the harmonies are different and it's a discord, then you don't tie it over.
Okay, that's something.
That makes sense to me.
That can be in the preface or the performance notes, but
well, you don't need to do that in Britain. It's only when you have people who pick around like you and get very fussy that you need a note.
Yeah, but the funny story is when I commissioned 25 composers, including you, to write a piece to celebrate the 25th anniversary of my New York Virtuoso Singers, I got all these wonderful pieces, and I took a survey. I asked all of them, what does it mean to have a whole note tied over to an eighth? 1/3 of them, approximately, said it means hold it as printed to the end of one. 1/3 of them said cut off on the downbeat, and the other third said whatever you want. I don't know. So it cool. Anyway, I wanted to ask you you've won so many awards, and I'll mention the one you just won a few days ago in a moment. But what was it like receiving the Queen's Medal for Music 2017 from Queen Elizabeth herself in Buckingham Palace? And can you explain how your Scottish roots, as you described in your acceptance of the award, have impacted your music?
Well, those are two questions. Me, the Queen, I had met the Queen before, but only for all of 5 seconds, as at the end of a concert or something that she has attended, you go and shake her hand. So I'd done that several times. So I had actually met most of the royal family that way. But this was special. This was the Queen's Medal, which is given out to either a composer or a performer every year in Britain. And you get a half hour alone with the Queen.
Oh.
Alone, except for actually Judith Weir was there. She is the master of Queen's music right now. So she was there being very discreet. She was just there as a chaperone. Mm-hmm. And I tried to involve her a little bit in the conversation. But we had a wonderful conversation, very casual, not about things. We discussed the relative benefits of the left or the right coasts in various places. Okay. Like in Scotland, it's a question of Glasgow versus Edinburgh. Mm-hmm. In this country, it's a question of LA versus New York. And people have very strong opinions about those things.
You were very comfortable with the Queen. That's great. That's wonderful.
Now, what have I got to say about Scotland? Yeah. Well, the first important thing to tell you is that as a Scot, I can say "u," like in French, which is very useful. I went to France. No English person or even Americans can't say "u," but in Scotland you can, because if I talk in dialect a little bit, I can say, "Oh, I'm away to the tune. I'm away to the town." We say "tune." So there's a "u" right there. So right from childhood, I had that vowel sound in my ear and in my mouth. Well, as I say, no English person or American can right. do that at all. So that's the first Scottish thing, very important. Mm-hmm. Then, of course, I use Scottish poets. Mm-hmm. You've heard of Rabbie Burns?
No.
Robert Burns. Rabbie Burns. And I wrote something I called Songs for a Winter's Evening. It's a series of poems about the life of a woman. I managed to find a wonderful set of poems going through all kinds of different emotions that one goes through and set them into a series. I think there are six songs and 6 poems for soprano and orchestra called Songs for a Winter's Evening. So I wrote that, and then I wrote the Suite of Bairnsongs. Bairn is the Scottish word for child, so it's children's songs. And I worked with a wonderful Scottish poet called Maurice Lindsay. Those are very early. And then, of course, I wrote Mary Queen of Scots. Now, I'm a woman. I lived in France, and I'm a Scot. I'm the only possible person that can write Mary Queen of Scots, though other people have tried.
Right.
And then more recently, there's the Trumpet Concerto,
Right.
which didn't particularly have any Scottish bias until I had just met Alison in London. We were staying with friends, so we met there, and I liked her enormously. And she said, "Will you write me a trumpet concerto?" And I said, "Absolutely, I'd love to." And then remind me to say something else about performers in a minute.
Okay.
Then she said she heard we were going back to LA, and she said, "That's incredible. Because we have a place that we go to that you can actually see right now from our window. In the far distance, there's a mountain, and they have a little summer place there, which they go to occasionally. But the Scottish part of that is this. Just after I had met Alison, I went up to Edinburgh from London because I had a piece at the festival. And then I learned that there was an exhibition by a friend of mine, Victoria Crowe. And we went. And as I went in through the door and was just about to greet her and her husband, I saw a picture. And it came to me in a flash. That picture became my trumpet concerto. It was a picture of a tree growing out and reaching out. And I suddenly thought, this is what I want to do in the trumpet concerto, that it's like the soloist is reaching out to different people in the orchestra, like you reach out in life for friends, for ideas, for, whatever. And so in each movement, the trumpet reaches out to different members of the orchestra. And the final section is where she reaches out to another trumpet who is off stage and then comes on stage, and they have a duet.
Wow.
So,
yeah.
So that happened in Scotland. And although Vicky was originally English, she has been in Scotland so long, I think of her as being Scots.
Yeah.
And so it's based on the movements are based on some of her paintings. So when it was supposed to be done at the Hollywood Bowl, which was cancelled this summer because of the pandemic, that would have been fabulous because they have great big screens. And I thought then we could have the actual paintings projected during the performance, at certain places in the performance. If it's done in an ordinary concert hall, they're there in the program and in the program book, so people can see the paintings. But I thought it'd be wonderful in LA that they would be up in the screen.
You know what that reminds me of? Because you mentioned Imogen Holst. I did the Planets by Gustav Holst, her father, at the Brooklyn Academy. And I trained my chorus, and Bob Spano conducted it. And in back of us the whole time were the moving color images of NASA space images in color of all the planets. Breathtaking.
Oh, wow. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Imo was wonderful. Yeah, she was great.
Now you...
Oh, and then I was going to tell you something else, vis-a-vis performers. I always told my students this, but I also tell myself this all the time. Make friends with performers and pick their brains mercilessly.
Right.
And as I picked Ali's brain, because though I've written a lot for the trumpet, I had never written a concerto for a trumpet. So I learned a lot from her. So that's what I always told my students, make friends with the performers. So when you come, even when you're working with an orchestra, you can't take up rehearsal time in front of everybody dealing with stuff, but there's always a break. And in the break, I'll sometimes go up to a player and say, if you did this, would that be better? Or if you bowed it like this, would that make it work better? And they'd say yes or no. And I say, well, if it works better, let's do it. Or if something is awkward, I like to know that it's awkward so I can change it. Right. So I always said to my students, don't make things unnecessarily difficult. because it'll take away from your main idea. You need to have wonderful ideas, but you also need to be practical about it and make them work in your score so they're not unnecessarily difficult.
And I remember.
Sound difficult. It can sound virtuosic and difficult, but it shouldn't be that unnecessarily difficult for a great performer.
And I can vouch that you practice what you preach, because I remember maybe 4 years ago or so when you were intending to write, it was either Voices of Our Ancestors or the Missa Brevis, that you took a subway train in New York City to Brooklyn, to the home of my organist, who had a pipe organ in his apartment, twice, to pick his brains about the organ. It was
bet.
It didn't matter. He was like,
the organ is terrifying because partly because they're all so different. I mean, every single church has its own organ and they're different from another one. So you can't really make precise predictions. So I never say exactly what the stop should be. I should say it should be sort of like this, and I make a description. Then a smart organist will find a fabulous stop, because there's no way you can know.
well, I promised you I wouldn't take too much of your time. So I can go on forever, obviously, but I want to just show you a picture. You remember this event that we did?
Oh, wow. There you are.
Yeah, I had long hair then, right? This is at a concert. I believe it was your 75th birthday concert. I did a lot of your music, and Michael York was the narrator for the time being, Advent, which is one of your very, very best choral works. I'm stunned every time I listen to it. But you mentioned the Trumpet Concerto, so let me I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that just 4 days ago, you won London's South Bank Sky Arts Award for your recently completed Trumpet Concerto. This is the only award ceremony in the world to represent the entire spectrum of the arts, with categories for TV, drama, classical music, theater, comedy, dance, film, visual arts, pop, literature, and opera. So congratulations on that.
That came as a total surprise. I had no idea I was even sort of up for it. So that was wonderful. But again, I think it's thanks to Alison, a wonderful performer who brought it to life. And again, a wonderful conductor.
And what's her name? What's her last name? And what's the conductor?
Alison Balsam.
Balsam.
Balsam is the trumpet player, yeah.
And who conducted it?
Well, Mirga and Grasinice Tila, I think is how you pronounce it. I might not have it quite right. She was not able to do the premiere. She did some later performances. So it was Edward Gardner who actually conducted the premiere.
Okay, well, congratulations. Are we going to be able to hear that soon? I mean, for example, would it be on YouTube or a CD?
Well, I hope it'll come to the Hollywood Bowl next summer, because it was canceled this summer. So maybe it'll come, I don't know. Maybe this award will help it get performances. I hope so. And who knows when we're going to get back to normal.
Well, you're sure. I have one thing to show you before I let you go. Do you recognize, do you know what these are? They're stones, they're rocks.
They're rocks.
I stole them from the beach at Aldborough.
Who shall I tell?
Britain must have walked on these rocks with his bare feet. So I
didn't know Ben did that. Bare feet. I did work with Peter, though, Peter Piers, because I wrote, again, my Scottish heritage. I wrote a piece, what was it called? Sir Patrick Spens, for tenor and guitar. Now, I knew Julian Bream really quite well at one point. I lost touch once I lived in America. But anyway, Julian I knew very well, and Peter I'd met several times, but they did these songs. So yes, I met them, and I was in a rehearsal with them, and he performed them at Aldborough for the festival. I forget the year. I think it was maybe about 1961, I think, way back.
Wow.
Yeah, way back.
Well, I met Peter twice, once in New York, but once when I think I woke him up from a nap, because when I went to Albrook, I went on purpose the day after the festival ended one year in 1983. And I made an appointment to go see the Britten Library, which was his home. But I rang the wrong doorbell, and Peter Pears groggily, said, "It's the button."
You were at the Red House.
Yeah.
You were at the Red House.
Yeah. So what advice can you give young composers besides what you said, to learn each instrument very well?
Always be yourself. I'll tell you one thing that might be interesting. And this I learned from my teacher, Nadia Boulanger. I'd run into trouble and I said, I tried all week. I got stuck. Things weren't going. She said, here's what you do. She said, you go home and every day next week till you come back to me, the week after, you write a very short but a complete piece. But, and here's the important thing, it doesn't matter how bad it is. In other words, I think what I think she was saying to me, it was what I discovered for myself, is that you have this critic sitting on your shoulder. And I have a very fierce critic here most of the time. He's a pain in the ass. And when you're writing, I find you have to sort of take him to the door and say, get lost. I don't need you right now. I'll need you later to evaluate, but not right now. But anyway, the thing is that to write and let it come out, let ideas happen, instead of saying, that's no good, you say, if I do this, then perhaps that is a much more positive way of doing things. You can say, well, that doesn't work, but I could try this, and then that would happen. And then, oh, yes, that would link up with this. And
it frees
so
you.
that's, I think, what she was doing with write a piece every day. Doesn't matter how bad it is, that you're not being critical about it. So it's important when you're in the early days of a new work, not to be critical, to let ideas happen, just write them down, don't cross them out, leave them there. And sometimes you come back, you see an old idea that's useful. Then, of course, later on, you need to be very critical, about making it work for the performer. That's when you begin to pick their brains and saying, why is that interval awkward? Well, because I have an awkward change there. So, all sorts of things. There you have to be picky, but your main work is done. So you're picking something that exists and improving it.
Well, now I know, because you told me that often it just flows. The ideas just flow from you without much effort. And now
well, there's something else to tell you, which is I think also might be useful for people. And I call it the cat sat on the mat syndrome. And that is that when you write every day, you write, and you feel you're coming to the end of what you can do that day. So you say, the cat sat on, and you're going to say the mat, but you do not write it down. Mm-hmm. So the cat sat on. Okay, then you go away, and there's something else I can tell you. You have the rest of the day, you go off, and you do the next time you come to your desk to start work, and you say the cat sat on. Oh yes, and then the mat, and then of course the dog bit. You don't write the postman, so that you have something really easy to start with that you've had from the day before, which gets you back into the flow.
Wow, that's great.
And it works. And one time I was in the middle of writing my opera about Harriet Tubman. We went round the world. We were gone for 6 weeks. We were around the world. And I said, okay, let's do that. So I said, the cat sat on, and off we go. And we go to Japan. We went to India. We went, eventually came back, and I sat down at my desk. And I said, oh, yes, the mat. And I was back into it again. I mean, it's extraordinary. It works. And I thought it was brilliant. I'd thought of that. And then I found lots of other people, lots of other artists do it, painters, writers, and so on. It's the same thing. So that a lot of people do that.
That's great. That's great advice. Before we end, do you want to bring your critic in for a quick look? Next to you is Peter Mark, my dear friend, Maestro Mark, who is...
Mark is sitting right here.
Of the Virginia Opera and conducted many great operas there. And well, hello, Peter.
Here he comes.
Thank you both for this and for your friendship. And hopefully we can do many more things together when this is all over.
We certainly look forward to that. You've been just
Yeah.
a really loyal and trusted musician and friend.
Yes, indeed.
The best kind of colleague.
My pleasure. So I'll bid adieu and have a great time there, and we'll see you soon.
Yeah.
Good.
See you back on the right coast,
Yes.
not the left coast.
Absolutely.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.